All right, 5 minutes after 9 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. I don't need to tell you this, but I want to say this as a way to introduce our next guest to you. When we are young and when we're children, and there are children out there right now that are not us. It's kind of crazy to say, isn't it? But anyway, when we are young, we have the amazing ability to absorb knowledge. And so reading when we're young is absorbed better than it does when we read them when we're older, I think. But more important than learning is being able to see that somebody like yourself has achieved something amazing, and maybe you can make that happen for yourself too. That's why I think books that are written for young readers that showcase the accomplishments of African Americans, it's really important. Or in this case, showing the accomplishments of a woman. That woman is Jeanette Rankin, and the book is called Jeanette Rankin, America's First Congresswoman. It is written by Peter Aronson, and as I looked through the book, not only was I educated, because I really didn't know anything about Jeanette Rankin, but I was also thinking about the young girls who will read the book. I think it's considered a middle grade book, right?
Yes.
Right? So I was thinking about them. You know, they have a lot of role models in our world who are singers, for example, or maybe some female athletes. And nowadays we do have a few more ladies in elected positions. But it is interesting to hear, especially in a time when it was almost unheard of to have a lady in Congress. Jeanette Rankin is the book, America's First Congresswoman. Peter Aronson is a journalist, an attorney, an historian, a researcher, and making a big contribution to the future of America, because I think a lot of girls will say, you know what, this could be me. I could do this, right? Peter Aronson, good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Larry. Good morning, Robert. Thanks for that wonderful introduction.
Oh, you're welcome. I like this kind of thing because, politics is a touchy subject, but no matter how you look at it, if we have somebody who's made that achievement, Barack Obama's a great example, then we need to learn about it, but especially we need to teach the kids about it, right?
Well, I agree. Myself, I had not even heard of Jeanette Rankin more than a year ago, and I began reading. I found the name in an article, then I thought, this is potentially a great story for kids. I read more and more and realized it was a fabulous story. Most people outside Montana had never heard of her, and she's really someone who's a guiding light for not only female politicians, but also for young girls and young women across America.
Yeah, and I'm hoping it's finding its way into the schools because I think boys will benefit from it too. I maybe in my intro I made it seem like it's a book girls should read, which I still stand by, but I think boys will see, I don't know, maybe the girl sitting in the chair next to them has just as much of a future as they do.
I'm obviously a little biased, but I think it's a great book for all kids, say ages 8 through 14. It tells a story about a girl who grew up in Montana in 1880. That's going back, 140 years. And, it was a pioneer state. She came from somewhat of a privileged family. And, over time, she had great confidence and, just developed great leadership ability and went on to do great things.
Does the book talk about her parents? Were they part of the reason, not just the money that they obviously had, but just the idea that were they supportive of her pursuing whatever it is she wanted?
Well, I think her parents did support her. I think the way she was brought up, she gained independence at a very early age. Her father was a successful businessman. Her mother was sort of a stay-at-home mom in those days. And because her mother, I think, didn't do much, and Jeanette had this great drive to accomplish, she helped her mother raise her many siblings. So at a young age, 10 or so, she was already doing things that most 10-year-olds were not doing. And then her father died when Jeanette was relatively young, which, again, catapulted her into even a more independent lifestyle. And I think her father was a pacifist, and she inherited pacifism from her father.
And she was not only active before she was elected and during her time that she was elected, but she didn't stop there. After she had served her terms, then she also made herself known to the presidents and the situations that abounded within those administrations, and she commented on them.
Right. Well, so, Jeanette Rankin had a really interesting career. She was a social worker in the beginning and wanted to help people. Then she became a suffragette. She became very active in helping women gain the right to vote in the state of Washington first, and then she became, sort of a hero in the state of Montana. She led the movement there. Then she went into politics, and she only served as a congresswoman for 4 years. So she died when she was in her 90s. She was only in federal office for 4 years. So what happened was, in between her two terms, and there was a 20-year gap between her two terms, and then there was a 30 years after she left Congress in which she still lived. She was very active as a lobbyist for women's causes, for children's causes, and then she became very outspoken against the Vietnam War in the 60s and early 70s, and she, regained national prominence because of her anti-war stance.
So she was elected for the first time in 1916. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
But women didn't get the right to vote till 1920.
Correct. So what happened was individual states were granting women the right to vote. In fact, Wyoming was the first state in 1890, and then mostly it's all western states, and then Montana granted women the right to vote in 1914. And Rankin led that movement in the state of Montana. So when she ran for office, women could vote in Montana. They couldn't vote for president, but they could vote for her running for a congressional seat. And that's one reason why she was elected.
So she voted against going into war after Pearl Harbor?
Well, she voted against going into war in 1941 after Pearl Harbor. She was the only member of Congress or the Senate to vote against war. She also voted against the U.S. entering World War I in 1917, and there she was among 50 other Congress members who voted against war. So she stood by her belief. She didn't believe in war. She ran on a pacifist platform, and she believed that unless the U.S. borders, unless the borders of the 48 states, the mainland, was invaded, we should not go to war.
Ah, okay. Did she change her mind in later years?
Not at all. No, she never changed her mind.
No, she held on to that, huh?
Yeah, she held on.
That is interesting. So, you're discovering her. I mean, it helps us discover her. I know there are other biographies about her written for adults, but in this case, this book is for young readers. But I'm telling you, Robin and I both got something from it as well. You don't have to be young to get something from this book.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think I laid out the story as best I could. I think it's for if a 8 or 9-year-old is going to read it, I think they probably need to be fairly sophisticated and interested in history. It's not an easy read for that age. I think it can keep an audience, into the young teens, maybe even middle teens. I just thought that was an important story to tell. So I'm really glad that I was able to tell it, and hopefully a lot of kids will read the book.
What do you think, or what does history say was the support, the reason for the support, especially in an era when women weren't even voting yet?
Well, I think, you go back to the state of Montana, I think she was able to mobilize women to help her get the vote out. There was also a quirk in the elections which may have helped her may have helped her win. In Montana in 1916, they had two members of Congress, and the person who got the first and second most votes went to Congress. So there were not two districts.
Ah.
There was one statewide district. So she knew that even if she came in second, she could get elected. And in fact, that's what happened. She came in second, and she was elected to office.
And she was well respected among the men, because when she first you pointed out that when she first set foot in the chambers, all the men rose and applauded her.
I think she was very well respected, but I think also they looked at her as a novelty. Being the first woman to set foot as a voting member in Congress, they treated her with respect. I got no sense they didn't treat her with respect. Though until she voted against war, I would say that she was criticized tremendously after she voted against war. And she was not alone voting against World War I, but she was the one who was criticized the most, I would say.
And when she went to college and she graduated from college, a lot of her girlfriends, all they really wanted to do was to get married and have children and have a family.
Well, certainly in 19, so this was at the turn of the century. She graduated college, I think, in 1902. I don't know what percent of women went on to a career in the work world, but I don't think it was as a high percent. And certainly, so she was, not only was she not going to get married and not have children, her career became her life. But then, obviously, to go into politics at that time in history was almost unprecedented.
Have you had feedback? I know the book just came out like a month ago, right? Or maybe not even a month ago?
Yes.
Have you had feedback from adults who maybe were just not that good in history class in school, who are looking at your books now and trying to catch up on what they missed and maybe grasping it better because it is written for a middle schooler?
Well, what I'm hearing from adults is that, I never heard of her either. I don't know anyone, frankly, who had heard of her. That's why when I do my marketing, I do say, I think adults and teenagers can learn from this book equally. I don't know how many adults are going to buy a book with 126 pages and written as at a relatively simple level, but I think it's an educational tool for everyone. No, you told me you had not heard of her.
Right,
I had not heard.
right.
Go back a year in time. I had not heard of her.
Wow.
She's not a name in history.
And you do have photographs in there that throughout her career documents all the different events and the people that not only that she served, but the people she met.
Right. I feel it's very important to show visuals when you're writing a book for children. So I worked very hard. I found approximately 50 historical photos and was able to purchase them from various institutions, and also a lot of them were public domain. So I just think it's important. It's you look at these pictures, you see the way she looked. I see, when I look at her face in these pictures, I see a woman who has tremendous and unwavering confidence. That's what I take away from those photos, those close-ups of her.
Yeah.
I know you have the book. You probably have the book in your studio there. If you look at her face, this is a woman with great confidence, and I find that really stimulating.
It looks like there's a really well done statue of her in D.C. too. I was looking through the photographs, and there's one of her in wherever that is in Washington D.C.
Right. Well, it's in the Capitol building.
Okay.
Every state is allowed to have two state heroes represented in the Capitol building in the way of a statue, and Montana has Jeanette Rankin as one of them.
And you point out that Congressman Rankin was very good at making her point. She didn't have to have her, like yell at people and things like that. She had everything together.
For the most part, there's one incident I covered in my research where she, I think when she was running her campaign in 1916, she became very upset in an office. It's unclear if she became upset at a particular individual or something in the news, but she became enraged and she started throwing things. And this story is represented in the several books that I read as research for my book. And apparently a good friend of hers wrote her a letter and said, you have this great ability to communicate, and you need to tone it down and learn to communicate in a way that people can relate to. And so I think that's the one incident. But for the most part, I think she's known as a person who was a little bit tough. I think you can't succeed at the level she succeeded at and not be somewhat tough. She was demanding.
Right.
But she's for the most part, I think she got along very well with people.
The book, again, is called Jeanette Rankin, America's First Congresswoman, and it's written by Peter Aronson. I just went to your website, and let me tell the listeners what that is. It's peteraronsonbooks.com. Aronson is how Peter spells his last name, peteraronsonbooks.com. The one of the things in the book I wanted to mention is that it shows a photo of students in Tallahassee at the Florida State University back in 1970 protesting the Vietnam War. And so there's a Florida connection to that. How did it happen that she ended up in Florida?
Well, actually, I'm not sure she was in Florida. I'm just representing.
Oh, I see.
The general protest movement. She might have gone to Florida. I can't.
I got you.
For sure. But she was living in Georgia. Her last part of life, she lived in Georgia, and she was, very active in the anti-Vietnam War movement.
Tell us a little bit about her personal life. Was she married? Did she have children?
She was not married. She did not have children. Her personal life, frankly, is a little bit of a mystery. She had a lot of friends. There's not a lot out there about her personal life, other than she had a lot of friends, and pretty much she devoted herself to her career in politics and activism, and speaking out about the issues she believed so strongly in.
And sometimes both men and women say that they can't be as effective if they have a family and they're trying to pay attention to what's going on in the world of politics to make our country a better place. Do you agree with that?
Not necessarily. I think, many people who are incredibly successful are married with families, and that adds a whole nother layer of experience to someone. But you don't have to be married. You can cut either way. Just so happens in this case, Jeanette Rankin was not married, did not have children, and she was incredibly successul.
How did the press handle her? Were they fair to her? Were they mean to her? How the press has a way of being mean to politicians. It doesn't matter what side you're on. But how were they to her?
Well, I think they were incredibly sexist towards her at times. Going back in history, certainly probably the most sexist in 1916, 1917. Less so in 41 and 42, but still sexist. And you can, those were times when we still live in somewhat sexist times, right? So we're still battling those issues. Mm-hmm. And certainly when you go back many, many decades, you can imagine when she voted against the war, she was harshly criticized. And so, particularly when she was the only one to vote against the U.S. entering the war, after we were bombed at Pearl Harbor, there were just terrible criticisms of her.
Peter, I'm curious about your discovery of Jeanette Rankin. When you first discovered her, obviously you had to learn a little bit about her before you had any inspiration to write about her. Was there one issue that she represented or championed for that really made you want to tell the world about her?
I'm not sure that there was one particular thing. I think when I first read about her, it was literally a sentence in a large article I was reading. I saw the name Jeanette Rankin. She was named as the first first woman elected to Congress. I had never heard of her. I'm always looking for story ideas for my Groundbreaker series. This is the second book of my Groundbreaker series for middle grade readers. So I'm always looking. I keep a thick file of story ideas, and I saw this that as I always do, I said to my wife Emily, I said, Emily, this is a story. This is going to be another Groundbreaker. And then I Googled her. I looked her up. The more I read about her involvement in the suffrage movement, and being from Montana, and the fact that her name really wasn't out there in the public domain on a grand scale. Most people had not heard of her. I thought this is a natural book, and the fact that she even remained active almost until she died. Her life really, I think it carries great meaning for everyone. Yeah. It really does. She's really someone you could hold up in a light.
Oh, absolutely. Even if we don't agree with all of her decisions, I definitely see her as a trailblazer, and as I mentioned in the introduction, an inspiration for young people, especially young girls, to become who they want to become. I'm just curious about if she voted against entering the war after Pearl Harbor. What were her feelings about allowing the Jewish refugees into our country? Because I've heard mixed stories about that, especially FDR. There was a story of him turning back a boat of Jewish refugees that were trying to come into this country. What were her thoughts, or do you not know?
I don't know her thoughts, to be honest. There was nothing in the public record that I read about that. Certainly, our country has a unpleasant mixed history in that issue.
Yeah,
There's no question about it. I don't know if she spoke on that issue or not.
And when you were writing the book, you really kept everything accurate from a true journalist point of view, but it's a very enjoyable read, and it's very fun. It's not textbookish at all.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's what I tried to do.
Yeah. And this is the second biography you've written for young readers. Is that right?
Right. This is, I created this Groundbreaker series, and the moniker is that these are short biographies about extraordinary people who do extraordinary things, and I try and focus on people who are not household names. Because everyone's written about the Abraham Lincolns and George Washington, so I'm trying to go. So my first book was on a famous violinist named Bronislaw Huberman, a Polish Jew who saved Jewish musicians from the Holocaust by starting an orchestra in Palestine after the Nazis came to power in Germany.
Wow.
That had to have been an emotional time for you to write something with that magnitude and all the research you had to put into that one as well.
Well, yeah, I agree. All those Holocaust stories are just one after another are more amazing, and you wonder how people had the fortitude and the courage to do what they did.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So you were kind enough to send us a copy of Jeanette Rankin, America's First Congresswoman. It is not for resale. It says it right on the book. But I would like to give it away. So if I have a listener who would like it, please call me. I'll put your name on it. It'll be waiting for you here. This book and the other books that Peter has written are on Amazon. And I found your books also on your website, which, just to repeat, is peteraronsonbooks.com. Well, thank you for taking the time to do this. I think you're making a big contribution. It'll have a positive effect, probably in ways that we can't even imagine, as long as it gets into the schools.
Well, Larry, thank you. I appreciate that. If I can add just one more thing, and thank you for that plug about Amazon. The book's also available on Ingram Spark, which is a place where librarians and school teachers can go and purchase the book as well.
Oh, nice. That's good to know. I'm just assuming it's available everywhere books are sold, right?
It's in select bookstores, but mostly Amazon and Ingram are the two places where it's most easily obtained, yes.
Okay, very good. That's Ingram Spark, by the way. Thank you. Thank you for being on the show with us, Peter. Good stuff.
Larry, Robert, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. We'll be right back.
Are you ready for some great new deals this week at Bob Wine's Camellia Gardens? Well, just take a listen. A huge truckload of azaleas